Hello, and welcome to Chapter 3 of Intro to Psychology. In this video, I'll be discussing the brain, by far the most interesting organ of the human body. I want to start by dispelling two very common myths about how the brain works. The first myth is the idea that there are left-brained people and there are right-brained people. There's many different variations of this myth. Some people say it's a learning style. Some people say it's the side of your brain that's more active over the course of your life. Overall, this idea that there's a left side of the brain that's more active or that's preferred, or a right side of the brain that's more preferred, is a really gross oversimplification. It's true that there are some brain functions that are lateralized, that are more prominently associated with the activation of one side of the brain over the other, such as speech and language. Those are well known in right-handed people to be related to the activation of specific parts of the left hemisphere. But when you look at people's brain function overall, there's no evidence to suggest that some people tend to have more activation grossly on the right side of the brain or more activation on the left. And when someone is doing a creative task, such as painting, you'll see that both the left and the right side of the brain are active, have various spots of activation, just the same way that as when someone's doing a mathematical task or some other kind of more traditionally academic or computational task. There's many areas of the left and right side of the brain that will be active together. The real truth is that the brain is a really complex organ, and it's really hard to separate the brain's functions into just two even sides. And we'll see a little bit more about that in this video. The second really popular myth about the brain is this 10% myth. And it's many different variations. The idea that we only use 10% of our brains. Some people say that we only use 10% of our brain power. Sometimes people say we only reach about 10% of our brain potential. It's morphed over the years. It was first popularized by a writer of a self-help book back in the 1920s who kind of heard it as an oversimplification of a scientific talk. And it's just morphed over time, and it's a really enticing idea, so much so that it was the basis for the movie Limitless in 2011, as well as the TV series and the movie Lucy in 2014, which depict what would supposedly happen if a person actually was able to tap into 100% of their brain power. And the various manifestations of this myth, none of them are plausible. So if we only used 10% of our brain area, then we know that the other areas of the brain would shrivel up and die. We know that the brain operates on this principle of use it or lose it. Just like the same way if you have a cast on your arm, if you've ever experienced that or anywhere else on your body, you'll notice that that arm kind of tends to shrivel up if you're not using it. It gets weaker over time. The muscles there get weaker. The same thing for the brain. If we were only using 10% of the surface area or the area of our brain, then our brains would shrivel up. Also, we know that damage to the brain, any part of the brain, results in impairment of function in many different ways. So it's not area. And then some people say it's potential or brain power, and that's not supported by anything that we know about people who do actually have above average or high average or superior capabilities like savants or intellectual geniuses. For the most part, their brain activity does not look that much different than any other regular human, but they might differ in anatomy. They might have slightly larger areas of the brain. And we'll discuss that a little bit further in chapter 8 when we talk about memory. So these myths are very prominent. Only 27% of the people in this class answered this question correctly about myths and the human brain. The human brain is actually the third largest organ in the human body. The first is actually your skin, and then second in most people is the liver. But even though it's the third largest organ in the human body, it consumes about 20% of our overall oxygen intake, even though it's only 2% of our overall weight. And so it's a really important organ in the body. It's probably the busiest and really the driver of everything that we do as humans. It helps give rise to our mental processes and behavior and our minds, and really is central to who we are as human beings. So a few interesting tidbits about the brain, particularly the human brain. We don't have the biggest brains, even though it's widely believed that humans are the most advanced organisms on the planet. There are many different species that have bigger brains than ours. What we do have is the biggest encephalization quotient. So the when you look at the ratio between actual brain mass and predicted brain mass for an animal of a given size, you see that it is highest in humans. So, in proportion to our body size, our brains occupy the highest proportion or the highest ratio of overall body size to brain size. And in particular, the frontal lobes of humans, and we'll talk a little bit more about the frontal lobes in a moment, are particularly larger in humans in comparison to the brains of other animals. So there are many different ways to label and organize the brain. There are Brodmann areas, there are neuropsychological charts. You can organize the brain by areas in development. I'm going to be providing some simple ways, some simple introductory ways to navigate brain anatomy.